You're listening to episode 169 of The Secular Buddhist. Welcome to The Secular Buddhist. I'm Ted Meissner. The Secular Buddhist is the official podcast of the Secular Buddhist Association, a grassroots-driven effort to answer the needs of secular teaching and practice for contemporary society. The podcast has interviews and roundtable discussions pertaining to engaged Buddhist training and practice, and the SBA website has show notes for each episode along with resource materials. Though the podcast focuses on core practice from a secular viewpoint, more traditional teachings are welcome and openly discussed. Bernd Kaponig and Cristina Pecchia, two of the four founders of the new German-language secular Buddhism website, join us to speak about their work with communicating secular Buddhism to the German-speaking world. As the concepts and practices of secular Buddhism become more widely known, both for what they are and as secular Buddhism, it is of course expected that interest is not limited to people with English as their first language. A Google Translate widget is a very helpful tool on the main Secular Buddhist Association website, but it can't capture that particular variance of interpretation and cultural context that are a closer fit for our fellow meditators in other countries. This diversity of the secular approach is, as I've said many times on this podcast, one of its greatest strengths. That these practices can reach people who, for ideological or cultural reasons, may not otherwise ever consider studying what those with a more traditional Buddhist background understand as panya, sila, and samatha, is a potential game-changer in the direction of our global community. But, to get there, we need to speak the language, figuratively and literally. Cristina Pecchia is a researcher in the field of South Asian and Buddhist studies. She began a regular practice of Vipassana meditation in 2003 with Corrado Pensa and participated in retreats with Martine and Stephen Batchelor. She is interested in a secular approach to Buddhist practice, especially as an attempt to think of such a practice within Western societies, and to answer questions which are specific to contemporary Western culture. A German-speaking website on secular Buddhism provides an opportunity to exchange opinions and experiences on the practice of the Dharma, focusing on aspects that emerge as prominent in the present culture and society related to the German language. Bernd Kaponig is an IT architect and technologist, and volunteers in community projects that foster cooperation and participation in society as well as business. He's very grateful that since the beginning of his Dharma practice some 20 years ago, he has been able to work with Western Zen and Vipassana teachers who themselves had to find their way in foreign cultures, and that there is now an emergence of genuine Western and secular forms of Buddhism. His particular interest in a German-speaking blog is to open up a gate to Dharma practice for completely unreligious people, and also to hone his own understanding of practice in the course of writing and engaging in discussions with the community. Eva Maria Glatz worked as a psychologist and social manager. After her retirement, she now engages in voluntary social work, including environmental issues. Eva Maria has practiced meditation for 17 years, having started in the Zen tradition. She attended a number of retreats of different schools and has led classes in MBSR. Eva Maria is especially interested in thinkers who may not have aligned themselves with the orthodoxy and hierarchy of other traditions. She tries to connect Buddhist practice with engaged action in an endangered world. Monika Strobel originally practiced in the Shambhala tradition and became interested in secular Buddhism on retreats with Martine and Stephen Batchelor. Monika is a physician, teacher, and researcher at Vienna Medical University. Monica's worldview is agnostic, pragmatic, and oriented towards science. Her particular interest in Buddhist practice are mindfulness in everyday life, metta, compassion, and ways to deal with disease and the difficult phases of life. In this context, the Buddhist teachings are a rich source for her, but do not provide all the answers. So, sit back, relax, and have a nice Edelweiss tea. Our guests today are Bernd Kaponig. Bernd, thanks for being here.
Thank you. Hello.
And Cristina Pecchia. Cristina, thank you for being here.
Thank you. Hello.
So you are some collaborators in the development of a German language secular Buddhist site. And before we get into discussions about that, I'd like to ask each of you a little bit about your backgrounds and what brought you to a Buddhist practice, let alone a secular Buddhist practice. Bernd, let's start with you.
Well, what brought me to a Buddhist practice was a long time of reading Buddhist books, I would say. And it started by books by Eugen Herrigel about Zen and the art of archery and those kinds of things. And it was at a time when I was in my teens, where I was still very much shooting around with bows and arrows, and I was quite impressed by people that could actually hit their mark without looking at where they were aiming. So that got me very impressed at the very beginning, and I kept reading along those lines for a number of years. And when I eventually came to Vienna to study, and I studied computer science and business administration, when I did that, I found out that there were actually some Buddhist groups active in Vienna. And after some hesitation, I dared to join them and go to an introductory course. And that was actually a Zen course and Rinzai Zen. And that is what I did for a number of years. And over the course of my career, if you will, I came across a number of more Western-oriented kind of teachers who were doing some kinds of blends of schools, if you will. So I got exposed more and more to Vipassana and the Theravadan traditions. And I'm quite lucky that I didn't have to go to Asia and learn Asian languages to be able to work with teachers. So it was already a bit easier for us than I think it was for the previous generation. But I always felt that there's one more step that needs to be taken in order to really bring this home in our European or Western environment in general, and kind of use the language that is mainstream over here, that recognizes the findings of science and also uses the language that has been developed in philosophy and psychology, and also the frames of mind, if you will, that have developed over here, and relates to what the Buddhist teaching can say to things in the modern world, really. So and that led me more and more towards a westernized approach, and eventually to working with people like Martin and Stephen Batchelor and others. So that's it in a nutshell.
Wonderful. Thank you very much for that. Cristina, how about you? Tell us about your background and your first interest in Buddhism.
Well, I started actually at university because I studied Sanskrit, and I did this because I was interested in linguistics in the first place. And then there was a course in Indian philosophy, and I went there, and the teacher was also actually a teacher of Vipassana meditation. And so I just I just learned that something like this exists. But he was also a psychotherapist, and so at the lessons he was full of what at that time I thought were so old ladies with psychological problems. So I didn't want to participate to any Vipassana session because I thought it was more for people who have psychological problems. That was my perception at that time. And then many years later, I just waited for 3 years in a waiting list to start a Vipassana course or something like that with this same teacher, because then I changed my mind, not about the thing that some people at least participated at that time to these courses, mainly because they had some difficulties they wanted to solve with meditation, these problems. But because I also saw that there was something completely different, a different quality of doing something with our mind. So I wanted to do it. I was just ready much later than when I was 20 years old or something like that. So this was, first of all, a very intellectual meeting with Buddhism, because then I got a degree actually in Buddhist studies somehow. I studied Buddhist texts mainly, so I abandoned linguistics. But meditation came much later.
Excellent. Now, how did you two meet and come up with an idea or an interest in starting a website that's in German language for secular Buddhism? Bernd, why don't you tell us that part of the story?
So we came together at a study retreat that was led by the bachelors, so Martin and Stephen, and we actually attended a number of those, and I think the combination of the two, with Martin providing a very heartfelt kind of approach to meditation and being a really good practice teacher, and Stephen from a kind of intellectual perspective, picking apart the old texts and explaining them or reinterpreting them for us, initiated a spark in all of us, and we came together and had discussions about different ideas across the team. So there was for some time a text study group where we looked at old sutras and tried to make sense of those by ourselves, a bit sparked by the kind of discussions that Stephen had led. And eventually last summer, after a study retreat with the bachelors, we decided kind of on our way home, why don't we do something for the German-speaking space? Because so far it's been only dominated by English speakers, and there was very little discussion going on in Germany, in Switzerland and Austria, apart from one blog that actually had just stopped before the study retreat we attended. So when that German-speaking blog was shut down, and we had our discussions at the retreat and after retreat, the decision came about to why not continue it ourselves.
That's wonderful. Thank you for that. Cristina, once you got back then from this and you decided to start one for yourselves, what were the next steps? What did you do to start that process?
Well, we started, all together. I was approached by Bernd and Eva Maria in the retreat itself. And I said, well, it's a nice idea to do something in German, especially because I know, being Italian, that it's always, so to say, a pleasure, and it facilitates a lot to read something in your own language, not in English, even though, everybody knows a bit of English. And it is also necessary to, so say, to discuss in a way that is very specific and different in every culture. So I thought it was a good idea to offer something for German-speaking people. And even though, my German is very, very bad, but I just contribute mainly with ideas, not very much with the writing, but really presenting something in German.
And Bernd, at that point, I think you and I were introduced by Stephen Batchelor and had a conversation some time ago at this point about some of the basics of what tools might be available for you. And from that point, tell us about building the site itself. What did you do?
So I think after the discussion that we two had, that helped me a lot in terms of figuring out which way to go from a technical perspective, as well as gauging a bit the workload that was expecting us. So since we all have day jobs, I guess we were a bit afraid that this might be overwhelming from a workload perspective, and actually the conversation that I had with you appeased us in a sense, or appeased those worries. So that was very good. So the next couple of steps were really about figuring out what kind of content we wanted on the website, and what structure we wanted to give it, and essentially also discuss what goal we wanted to achieve with it. Mm-hmm. And we spent a fair amount on those kinds of discussions, and in particular on one piece, in terms of trying to find our own definition of what we mean by secular Buddhism, and what we actually want to talk about on our site. So crafting a text that outlines that consumed a lot of our time, and we addressed several other areas that we thought were very interesting for people like us, in terms of providing a little bit of an overview on meditation types and pointers to where to go for more information. And we compiled a quite comprehensive lists of literature on secular and other Buddhist things. And I think what is maybe a bit different to some of the other secular Buddhist efforts is that I think most of us have a keen interest in also kind of bringing Buddhist teachings to the street in a sense, or really socially engage, or even politically engage. So we also wanted to bring some of the topics that are not necessarily Buddhist at their core, but approach them from a kind of Buddhist, a secular Buddhist perspective. So things like, what do you do with migrants in Europe, which is a major political question, or what's a contemporary Buddhist perspective on economics nowadays. So we also wanted to look at things that are quite central to society, but just from a slightly different perspective. And defining, really getting a group feel for what it was that we wanted to achieve, certainly took a long time, but was also an extremely rewarding exercise, at least for me it was, because these kinds of discussions were really, really fruitful, and there were so many perspectives that our team of 4 could bring in their respective experiences. So that was really a great kind of work and experience for me, and I hope for all of us.
Wonderful, thank you. And you bring up an excellent point that as we approach a secular Buddhism and as we move towards that, how we manifest it in the world, whether our interests are on some of the issues that you've discussed, or even how we focus our definition of secular Buddhism. Here in the United States, we have a different culture than our friends in the UK or in Vienna or in other countries. So there's going to be some different areas of focus with that definition and the activities that we do, and that's normal, that's expected, that's part of the strength of diversity of a secular approach, is that we do know that it's going to reflect the culture in which we find it. Cristina, I wanted to ask you, as an academic, someone who has a background in Asian studies and Buddhism, what were some of the difficult things to translate from these ancient ideas into a contemporary Western way of looking at things? What are some of the differences that you see as an academic?
Well, one of the things is maybe this social engagement. This point is very difficult to translate. It's a cultural translation. And this is something that I find really challenging in the old perspective of secular Buddhism. And for example, we have been discussing which are the topics that we might include in this blog, in this website. What is Buddhist and what is not? How to approach a topic, a book, an author, and to do it in a Buddhist perspective. Because of course, when we read the Pali Canon or also Mahayana Sutras, we are confronted with topics that are relevant for the for ancient South Asian culture. And if we fix on them, we just somehow lose the right perspective of engaging in a spiritual path in our time. One topic, for example, the topic of rebirth, is something very important in Sanskrit texts, but also in the Tibetan tradition. And it is something that is important because it's something typical of Indian culture. And this topic, for example, we find also in the discussion in the group, that is something not really relevant for our culture. So we won't engage in it and discussing it and giving our opinion on this. We just find it, let's say, not relevant.
Thank you for that. And one question I'd also like to ask Cristina of you is, as an Italian who's coming to this and contributing to a German language site, have you considered the possibility of doing an Italian language secular Buddhist site?
Yes, I did, but I have to say that I just wrote to a couple of friends in Rome, and I have to say I didn't get any positive reply in this sense. Maybe because the people I know are doing Vipassana, and they are very happy with what they are doing and with the teacher with whom they are doing this. And let's say that there is already a lot of activity in the group in Rome, at least. They already have, for example, a paper that is published, a newspaper that is published every month. They have lots to do, and this topic per se is not so interesting, or let's say they take it as something very intellectual. So this is what I was told, that is an intellectual perspective. that, it's not so interesting, at least at the moment. But my opinion is that it is so because they are already engaged in doing lots of good activities that are actually very close to what we are doing in Vienna.
Bernd, let's shift back to you. I want to ask, as we draw to a close in our conversation, you had mentioned thinking about with your partners some of the things that you would like to accomplish. I was wondering if you would tell us a little bit about what you hope will happen with the production of the German language secular Buddhist site.
So I think in a sense the ultimate goal and real success would be if we can be facilitators for people to come together. So that we act as a kind of landing site that draw a particular audience and help people come together, form practice groups or just discussion groups or any kind of communication. And if that doesn't work out in a group sense, I think the second main goal is to encourage people to trust in their own practice. Obviously, it's easier to do things in a group. There's a lot of help you can get through that. But I think one of the key teachings of Buddha is really some form of self-reliance. And I think we all want to instill that kind of trust in your own judgment, trust in your own practice, in the readers that happen to stumble across our site and really engage with it. So these are kind of the, if you will, ideological goals. From a interaction with the site perspective, I think one of the goals is to keep the conversations and the discussions that happen there on a positive, constructive, and appreciative level. So when you go into some of the websites that are out there, and even in the German-speaking space, sometimes discussions get so dogmatic, and people just bash other opinions and that sort of stuff. So from a style perspective, we don't just want to be a forum for everyone to dump their the latest brain fart in a sense, but really engage on a level where you appreciate the other person and the other opinion and try to add to it and be constructive. And I think from a slightly more personal perspective, what we want to get out of this exercise for us is to really sharpen our own practice in a way, because if you kind of force yourself to write something down and formulate things, it also forces you to think much clearer about things that you think you may have understood. and once you try to capture that on paper or digitally for that matter, you kind of get a good grip for how good your grip actually is, and how elusive the cloud is that actually persists in your brain. So going through that exercise of really trying to pin things down that may not be down pinnable is really a great practice. And doing that in a group with a kind of exchange of different points of view and perspectives is rewarding in itself, even if he didn't have any readers at all.
One of the greatest vehicles for learning is teaching.
Definitely, yes.
Yeah.
But that's actually a good point that you bring up in terms of teaching. We try to make a point on our website as well that we are lay people and we do want to stay lay people, even though we've all practiced for decades. So we don't want to start a school or be teachers or anything like that. I think our mental model around that is that of a spiritual friend in a sense. So as our discussions in the team show us, there's a tremendous amount of things that you can learn from the others, and you don't need to elevate anyone into a teacher position to be able to learn from them. Of course, that can be inspiring and can help you a lot as well, but it's also not necessary. And I think our approach is really to be diligent and do the best we can as lay people.
And I greatly appreciate you sharing that the interest you have in this site, one of them, is to encourage a positive dialogue, a collaborative discussion between equals that may still disagree about things. And that's okay, that's expected, because we're very complex creatures. But to have a safe place, not in terms of physical danger, but just a safe place where one can ask questions and engage in conversation in a meaningful and pragmatic and beneficial way, I think is very helpful in progressing the proliferation of these ideas and practices into society, because you're modeling the behavior that we want to see.
Absolutely. I think that's absolutely spot on. And often something that in my experience in schools, traditional schools, doesn't get enough emphasis. I think there's really that one more step that often needs to be taken to continue your practice off the cushion and really carry it out into the world. And yeah, teachers emphasize that, but it's often not becoming part of the practice. And I think that's one of the reasons why we try to focus on that part in particular, engaging with the world and finding ways in everyday work environments, in society, in the economy, in your businesses, how to engage with a mindful and compassionate kind of approach. And when you do that, you obviously encounter all sorts of views of the world, and engaging with them in a creative way is really key to us and to me.
Cristina, how about you? What are some of the things that you would like to see happen out of the creation of the German language secular Buddhist site?
Well, one thing I really hope is that let's say other people start to sit together in a group as we do and discuss these topics and discuss their experiences, what they read, what they understand, and just share this. Because, yeah, as Bernd said, it's really a very, very nice experience in just human terms, but we also learn a lot about ourselves, about our understanding of things, of life, discussing together. And this goes back to the practice, to the Buddhist practice. And in this sense, it's very rewarding for us as individuals, but also important to for our practice. At least in my case, it's very helpful. So I hope that this website shows, a kind of discussion that might inspire other people to do the same in other parts of Austria, Germany, whatever. And just, because we offer different topics, and this might be just an example, and other people might get this inspiration from this. I think the first thing. Second thing, to show how you can discuss in a non-dogmatic way that, as far as I could understand, is something quite something that happens in Austria, maybe also in Germany, and I don't know enough. Much lesser in Italy, as far as I can see. Maybe because Italy has this Catholic tradition, which also means tolerance, and you can say lots of things without really, being dogmatic. And maybe, for in Italy, it's not so, this dogmatic point of view is not so important. And as far as I could see, in Austria it is. So this might be a good occasion for people who just read what we write, that there might be another way that is very serious, that is reliable way of speaking about Buddhism.
Cristina, you had used the word spiritual earlier, and I was wondering if you could tell us just a little bit about what you mean by that word, because sometimes people get a little anxious about it because it can mean several different things to different people.
Well, let's say that I like the word spiritual just because it's a bit better than religious, than religion. That is even more complicated in our culture, in Western culture. And it's using the word spirituality. I think it's important to use this word when we speak about Buddhism, just to specify that we want to take care of our spiritual life, our spiritual part as human beings, and not only of our intellectual part, because sometimes Buddhism and discussions about Buddhism become very dogmatic, and they become very intellectual. And sometimes we also speak about the practice, the kinds of meditations and techniques and this and that in a very, dry way, intellectual way. And after all, we speak about this because of the practice, because of a spiritual effort, a spiritual goal also that we have. And so just in a website, it is sometimes not so easy to make this clear, to make this evident. But we are doing this because we have spiritual goal, first of all. And then we discuss about, what it is about. Not in a dogmatic way, not in an intellectual way. Of course, we use the language and it becomes intellectual. But this is not our goal.
That's good. Thank you for sharing, because we sometimes forget in our discussions online, which are conversations with a computer, we forget that there's still a person on the other end, and that our goal here has to do with our experience in life, and we're still human beings, and we still do have passions, and we still have loves and aversions and all the rest of it. And what we can find to be personally helpful and uplifting and inspirational is also still very much a part of this.
Yeah, thank you.
Just one more thing came to my mind, maybe more for a personal goal rather than a team goal. But I would think that one of the aims is really to address a really secular humanist audience that may never have heard anything about Buddhism, or may even be unwilling to engage with it because of its religious connotation. So certainly making it possible for a modern secular person to kind of approach, under quotes, religious topics in this way would be another goal for me. And I have a lot of discussions with friends that come from a science believer background, in a sense, and opening the door for them to another view onto life is another goal, I think.
Yeah, and I'm glad you brought that up because we share that, and it's interesting to note that many of the people who join us on the Facebook page or follow the Twitter feed that we have for the U.S. site have a background in secular humanism, and that we've had a couple of different interviews on the podcast, and I've been interviewed myself by secular humanist groups that were very much in close alignment with that. Our friend Rick Heller identifies and works with the secular humanist groups in Massachusetts. So we are seeing that very close resonance, and for many secular humanists who are looking for a practice, that they have a set of ideals and a set of what we would refer to as sila, as pro-social behaviors, but not a way to practice mind states to help support that, are very interested in what the science is saying and what we're finding and what a tradition has to contribute to that discussion. So I agree with you completely. We have wonderful opportunities in our increasingly secular society to share what has demonstrated itself to be very pragmatic and reliable, Cristina, as you were saying, and very helpful to people in not just their personal lives, but in social change. For folks who are listening to the podcast, I will be linking to the German language secular Buddhist site on the episode page. You can also find it on our partner sites page on the SBA site. Our guests today have been Bernd Kaponig. Bernd, thank you for being here.
Thank you for having us, Ted. Bye-bye.
And Cristina Pecchia. Cristina, thank you for being here.
Thank you very much. Bye-bye.
Thanks for listening. If you'd like to learn more about something you've heard in today's podcast, please come visit the SBA website at secularbuddhism.org, and you'll find an entire webpage devoted to this and every episode. Discussion about this episode can be found on the episode page itself, along with show notes. The music for The Secular Buddhist is used by permission from John Kaizen Neptune's CD, Steps in Time. Additional music is provided courtesy of Monty Levinson of Taihei Shakuhachi and Rodrigo Rodriguez. Their websites are also linked on the SBA site on the About Podcast Music page. Until next time, remember, every moment you have a choice. Make it the best you can. See you next time on The Secular Buddhist.